Chapter 751. Mr. Chen, Ren Jiajia's director Xian wants to see you. I wonder if Mr. Chen has time. At this time, Sun Simiao walked up to David and asked in a low voice. Where is he? David also wanted to see what gift this Ren family would give him. Mr. Chen, you come with me. Sun Simiao said, and walked behind with David. After passing through a corridor and entering a private room, Sun Simiao pushed open the door, and David saw an old man of the same age as Sun Simiao, with white temples sitting inside. Palace Master Sun, when the old man saw Sun Simiao, he hurriedly got up to greet him. Patriarch Ren, this is Mr. Chen. Sun Simiao pointed to David behind him and said. Ren Xian walked up to David hurriedly and enthusiastically. I have always heard of Mr. Chen's name, but unfortunately I have never had the chance to meet each other. It's really a blessing for 3 lives to meet Mr. Chen today. Ren Xian's attitude is very respectful. After all, David's reputation is there, and he can't help but respect it. Patriarch Ren is polite. David smiled lightly, but he could see that the Ren family must have something to ask him. After several people entered the room, Ren Xian poured a cup of tea for David himself. Patriarch Ren, you asked me to invite Mr. Chen over, there must be something wrong. Sun Simiao threw bricks to lead the Jade Road. Yes, I have a treasure here. It's a waste of money in our Ren family, so I want to give it to Mr. Chen. Having said that, Ren Xian opened a leather bag beside him, and then took out a tightly wrapped thing from the leather bag. When Ren Xian opened the packaging layer by layer, a very delicate copper tripod was revealed. The bronze tripod is only the size of a palm. Although it looks rusty, the runes carved on it are very clear. Mr. Chen, this is a copper tripod that our ancestors bought. I heard that it has a history of thousands of years. It has been kept at home. I gave it to Mr. Chen, hoping it will be useful to Mr. Chen. Ren Xian pushed the bronze tripod in front of David. The ancestor of the Ren family was a tomb robber. Although he knew that he got it from tomb robbery, David did not dismantle Ren Xian. David didn't know much about cultural relics, but he was a little disappointed when he saw that this copper tripod was so small. What can such a small copper tripod be used for? David felt it for a while, but he didn't feel the presence of spiritual energy in the bronze cauldron, so this bronze cauldron was useless to David. However, David still took the copper tripod in his hand and tried to cover the tripod with his probing power, but soon, David had a strong sense of familiarity. After thinking about it for a while, David frowned slightly, and simply mobilized the spiritual power of his whole body, forming waves of fluctuations, and gradually leaned towards the bronze tripod. Buzzing! A trembling sound came, and the green rust on the tripod actually peeled off layer by layer. The volume of the copper tripod became larger and larger, and finally became the size of a plate. Then a green light flashed, and a brand new copper tripod stood out. Appeared in front of David and the others. This made Ren Xian and Sun Simiao drop their jaws in shock. They didn't know that this bronze tripod could even grow bigger, which was simply amazing. When David saw this, he was also surprised after a slight glimpse. It seems that there must be something special about this copper tripod. Looking at the bronze cauldron in front of him, I saw green inscriptions appearing all over the body, and the whole bronze cauldron gave a very heavy feeling. This tripod is well made, and it cannot be made by modern technology at all, so it is certain that this tripod is not an imitation. David looked at it carefully, and almost got close to the copper tripod, and he saw the word Sheneng inside the copper tripod. Sheneng Ding? David gasped, unable to believe his eyes. Chapter 752. This is one of the top 10 artifacts in ancient times, and Sheneng Ding is on the list. It is the Dan Ding handed down from the ancient Sheneng clan. He heard Irvin talk about the legendary artifacts in the past, but he didn't expect to encounter one of them today. You must know that this Sheneng Ding is an existence that all medical practitioners look up to. He didn't expect to come to Jiangnan once and let him encounter such a treasure. Under the excitement, David's eyes suddenly brightened. Picking up the Sheneng Ding Ding, David carefully looked at the inscription on the ding. His shocked expression was evident. It can be seen from this heyday of branding techniques and forms that this is absolutely true. Sheneng Ding. David's hands trembled with excitement. This is really a surprise. If you use this Sheneng Ding to concoct pills, then David will be able to concoct more advanced pills, and maybe he can also concoct the pills. If he can really practice the Zisui Dan, he will not hesitate to give Lin Tianhu and Chifeng Tu to eat. By washing the marrow, it would be great if Lin Tianhu and Chifeng could also step into the world of immortal cultivation. David needs strength now, and he also needs help. If you are surrounded by masters of immortality, you have nothing to be afraid of. Seeing David's excited look, Ren Xian and Sun Simiao looked at each other, while Ren Xian's heart was dripping blood. This copper tripod has been kept in their house for decades, and it has always been considered as a funeral object in the Shang and Zhou dynasties. Although it is valuable, it is nothing to the Ren family. There are many larger copper tripods in their family. Many bronze tripods. Originally thought this small copper cauldron was the most rubbish, so Ren Xian brought it over, but he didn't want this kind of thing to happen. I didn't expect the copper cauldron to get bigger. Seeing David's excited look, Ren Xian knew that this copper cauldron was. It must be a treasure. But now that it has been given to David, it is impossible for Ren Xian to come back. Patriarch Ren, I really like this copper tripod, so I will accept it. If Patriarch Ren needs my help with anything, please feel free to say. David gently stroked the copper tripod, and the copper tripod became the size of a palm again, and was directly carried into his arms by David. Seeing David say this, Ren Xian was instantly overjoyed. The annoyance in his heart just disappeared instantly, and he said excitedly, "Don't hide, Mr. Chen, I do have something to ask for. Please tell me, as long as I can help, I am absolutely bound to." When David got the Sheneng Ding, he was very excited, so he waved his hand. Ren Xian glanced at Sun Simiao, then followed David and said, "Mr. Chen, I heard that in addition to your martial arts skills, your medical skills are also unfathomable. It just so happened that my wife was ill and recovered. I hope Mr. Chen can help you take a look. See a doctor." David was stunned. He didn't expect Ren Xian to be so generous, and he was actually invited to see a doctor, and it seemed that Ren Xian and Sun Simiao were familiar with each other. Could it be that Palace Master's son can't see the illness of Master Ren's wife? David asked with some doubts. When Sun Simiao heard this, his face suddenly turned red and he said, "To tell the truth from Mr. Chen, I have seen it many times, and I really can't do anything. Even Palace Master's son can't see it. It can be seen that it is indeed a difficult and miscellaneous disease. I will go to the palace tomorrow to be quiet." David nodded in agreement, but it is not suitable to go to other people's homes to see a doctor at night. "Thank you so much, Mr. Chen, thank you so much." Seeing that David agreed, Ren Xian thanked him again and again. Patriarch Ren can rest assured now, as long as Mr. Chen takes action, there is no incurable disease, and Mr. Chen is a master of alchemy. After eating the medicinal pills made by Mr. Chen, you can strengthen your body and prevent poisons. Sun Simiao touted David, and Ren Xian nodded again and again. David glanced at Sun Simiao helplessly. This flattery, maybe Ren Xian also asked for 2 medicinal pills. Chapter 753. Early the next morning, Ren Xian personally brought someone to pick up David, and Sun Simiao also followed. Obviously, he also wanted to see how David treated his illness, so that he could learn something from it. The Ren family lives in the western suburbs of Lingzhou, covering more than 10 acres. "Mr. Chen, it's just ahead. This place is newly moved. The place where I used to live was too small." Ren Xian led David to speak. "Patriarch Ren, you are too modest. Your previous place was thousands of square meters, and it was still small. You really have a lot of money. Sun Simiao said jokingly. Ha ha ha, what is rich and powerful, in front of such martial arts masters as Mr. Chen and Palace Master Sun, money is a common thing. Ren Xian laughed. As soon as David stepped into the Ren family, he felt that something was wrong, as if the entire Ren family was enveloped by something. Although the spiritual energy of the current society is thin, it does not mean that there is nothing at all. But as soon as David stepped into Ren's house, he found that the thin aura he could still feel disappeared in an instant, as if he had entered a vacuum. And there was something wrong with Xiaolan. As a naturally charming body, Xiaolan was also very sensitive to the atmosphere around her. After entering the door, Xiaolan's brows were also slightly wrinkled. Do you feel something is wrong? David asked Xiaolan. Xiaolan nodded. As soon as I entered this yard, I always felt a sense of suffocation, the energy in my body seemed to be blocked by something, and there was no way to get the energy out of my danshan. David listened, smiled slightly, and said nothing. He knew that the Ren family must have been put into formation, but David didn't know why the Ren family was put into formation, so he should see the patient first. If the patient has nothing to do with the formation, David doesn't want to ask about the formation. Now, it is better for him to do more than one less. Mr. Chen, I'll make you a cup of good Longjing tea, you sit first. After entering the room, Ren Xian greeted David to sit down, and then went to make tea. Master, let me come. A servant hurriedly said to Ren Xian. After all, things like making tea and pouring water are all done by their servants. Don't worry about it, go upstairs and push the lady down, and say that there are guests. Ren Xian waved his hand. The servant nodded and left. Ren Xian brewed a pot of tea Longjing tea, then sat on the sofa and said, Mr. Chen, try this Longjing tea, it's all good new tea. Palace Master Sun, you should try it too, this kind of new tea is not common. Ren Xian also greeted Sun Simiao. David smiled slightly. In fact, he doesn't know how to taste tea, and almost all tea tastes the same when it comes to his mouth. Several people were chatting while drinking tea. Patriarch Ren, when your villa was being built, did you ask the master to see it? David couldn't help but asked Ren Xian. I've seen it. The site selection, construction, including the size and orientation, were all directed by the master. It cost more than 5 million. I heard that this master is from Tianluo Pavilion. It's very famous. Ren Xian didn't hide anything from David, he nodded and said. Tianluo Pavilion. David frowned slightly, as if he had never heard of it. However, when Xiaolan, who was beside David, heard this, she suddenly exclaimed, the people in Tianluo Pavilion showed this feng shui? So your family really has a lot of face, not to mention 5 million, if it doesn't matter. I'm afraid that people who can't invite Tianluo Pavilion at all. Xiaolan, do you know Tianluo Pavilion? David asked. Of course I know, Tianluo Pavilion was founded by Ni Sidao, a famous Taoist master in our southwest, and he used various feng shui secret techniques, Zhugong fixing and 5 elements bagua to create a set of sleepy dragon formations, even if it is a strong martial artist. Trapped in the formation is also difficult to escape, so today Luo Pavilion is very famous among us. Xiaolan followed David to explain. Chapter 754. Oh, David nodded. He didn't expect Luj to be so powerful today, so he asked Ren Xian, I don't know how Patriarch Ren got in touch with Master Luj today. After all, this place is thousands of kilometers away from the southwest. Even if Tianluo Pavilion has influence, it will not affect thousands of miles away. My youngest son knew him. He brought the house to show him. What's the matter, Mr. Chen, is there something wrong with this house? Ren Xian looked at David strangely. Oh, it's fine. David smiled slightly. Since it was Ren Xian's youngest son who led the family, David couldn't say anything. As soon as he entered the Ren family compound, he felt that something was wrong. When he entered the villa, David could already be sure that the house was under the formation, and it was very likely that Ren Xian's wife was ill. Array related. Just as a few people were chatting, a servant pushed a middle-aged woman downstairs. The middle-aged woman was sitting on a wheelchair, her face was very haggard, and the inside of her trousers was empty. Leg. Mr. Chen, this is my wife. After Ren Xian finished speaking, he turned to look at the middle-aged woman and said, "Sohen, this is the Mr. Chen I told you last night. He will definitely be optimistic about your headache." "Hello Mrs. Ren." David got up and smiled at Ren Xian's wife. "Hello, Mr. Chen." Ren Xian's wife looked at David, and the expression on her face was a bit strange. It might be because David was too young, and she didn't believe it. "Take care of your illness? Sohen, tell Mr. Chen about your situation and let Mr. Chen show you." Ren Xian waved his hand and let the servants leave. He pushed his wife personally, and it could be seen that the two were very loving. His wife lost her legs and was disabled. A rich man like Ren Xian didn't abandon his wife, and he was so loving. It's true that there are not many men who attach great importance to friendship. Seeing this scene, David also greatly changed his views on Ren Xian. "No need, Patriarch Ren, I already understand the situation of Mrs. Zun." David waved his hand. "Understood." Ren Xian was stunned for a moment, his face full of suspicion. He didn't see anything, he didn't even have a pulse, so he knew what was wrong. "Mr. Chen, what's the situation with me?" Ren Xian's wife just glanced at David, and even said that she knew her situation, most of which was a money swindler. She knew her own situation best, so she asked David to see if what David said was right. "Mrs. Ren, do you often have headaches, and when the pain starts, your whole body will collapse?" David looked at Ren Xian's wife and said lightly. "Yes, I often have headaches, and every time I feel pain, I want to commit suicide. No painkillers will help." Ren Xian's wife nodded. "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Ren's condition is very strange. As long as the headache starts, there is no way to control it. I used to use tranquilizers to relieve Mrs. Ren's headache, but it is of no use at all, but as long as you leave it alone, it will take a while. The headache disappeared on its own. I checked Mrs. Ren's body and head, and there was no problem at all." Sun Simiao followed David with a puzzled face. David smiled lightly. "Mrs. Ren's body is not sick, how could you be so bad? Her sickness is in your heart." "In your heart?" This time, Ren Xian and Sun Simiao looked at David in unison, wanting to hear how David explained. "Yes, Mrs. Su's illness is in her heart. The reason why she often has headaches and can't control it is because she can't sleep at night, and she often has nightmares. With a little bit of tricks, it has become the current situation." David nodded slightly. Chapter 755. "Sohen, is that really the case? Didn't I hear you say that you have nightmares at night?" Seeing this, Ren Xian hurriedly asked his wife. "I don't know why." Ren Xian's wife's eyes became dodgy, her face was ugly, and she was hesitant and unwilling to answer directly. "Ordinarily, it's just a nightmare at night, so why say it reluctantly? What are you talking about? Is what Mr. Chen said right? What's wrong with you? Is there something you're hiding from me?" Seeing his wife dodging and not answering him directly, Ren Xian felt very strange. "Woohoo!" Suddenly, Ren Xian's wife cried, and she cried very sadly. Seeing his wife crying, Ren Xian panicked. "Sohen, you, don't cry, what the H3LL is going on?" Ren Xian asked anxiously. But just as Ren Xian's wife was about to open her mouth, she saw a very energetic young man in a suit and leather shoes walked in, and beside the young man was a young man of the same age. "Dad, I invited Ning Yu to see my mother." The young man in the suit spoke to Ren Xian. This guy is Ren Xian's son Ren Sikeng. The young man beside Ren Sikeng glanced at the crowd, and finally his eyes fell on Xiaolan. After frowning slightly, he quickly turned his eyes away. Seeing Sun Simiao's presence, Ren Sikeng immediately nodded towards Sun Simiao and said, "Hello, Palace Master's son." Sun Simiao also smiled at Ren Sikeng. Sikeng is still so energetic, and his mouth is sweet. When Ren Sikeng saw David, he just glanced at him and didn't speak, because he didn't know David. But when Ren Sikeng's eyes swept across Xiaolan, he was instantly hooked by Xiaolan's beauty. Xiaolan's angelic appearance, as well as the face of a knife and axe, the devil's body is bumpy, and the body is exuding bursts of body fragrance. Ren Sikeng was instantly fascinated, looking at Xiaolan with a pair of eyes, even don't blink. Cough cough. Seeing that his son looked at Xiaolan unreasonably, Ren Xianzhong coughed twice. Although Ren Xian didn't know what the relationship between Xiaolan and David was, but his son was so unreasonable, if he annoyed David, it would not be worth the loss. Hearing Ren Xian's cough, Ren Sikeng came back to his senses and hurriedly asked Ren Xian, "Dad, who is this beauty?" "Sikeng, this is Mr. Chen who I brought to see your mother." Ren Xian did not introduce Xiaolan first, but pointed to David's introduction, and then continued, "This girl is Mr. Chen's friend and came here together." Ren Xian introduced like this in order to make Ren Sikeng restrain himself a little bit. Ren Xian knew that his son was a lecher, but he also had to separate occasions. Ren Sikeng just glanced at David coldly, still did not speak, but walked directly to his mother, squatted down and said, "Mom, are you feeling better?" Ren Sikeng's mother nodded vigorously, "It's much better, and the headache is not so serious anymore." "Mom, don't worry, I brought Ning Yu, he will definitely cure your headache." Ren Sikeng pointed to the young man beside him and said, "Master Ning, it's really troublesome for you to run." Ren Sikeng's mother smiled at Ning Yu. "Auntie, don't say that, I and Sikeng are classmates, you can just call my name." Ning Yu said very politely. Looking at this Ning Yu, David's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he asked Ren Xian, "This is your son's classmate?" "Yes, my villa was also chosen by Ning Yu to help you see it. Now he is studying in Tianluo Pavilion." Ren Xian nodded and said. Chapter 756. It's no wonder that 5 million people who can invite Tianluo Pavilion are your son's classmates. Xiaolan, who was on the side, heard this, and then suddenly realized. The people in Tianluo Pavilion have eyes above the top, and 5 million people want to ask them to move, which is simply a fantasy. Ning Yu heard what Xiaolan said, and immediately turned to look at Xiaolan. "Miss, it seems that you also know our Tianluo Pavilion." Although Tianluo Pavilion is very famous in the southwest, it is Jiangnan after all, separated by thousands of kilometers. I heard that there are not many people in Tianluo Pavilion. You Tianluo Pavilion is so famous in the southwest, of course I know it, but you, Master Ning, I have never heard of. Xiaolan smiled lightly. Ning Yu was not angry either, but looked at Xiaolan carefully, and suddenly his eyes lit up. "Are you from Miao Village?" "Yes, I'm from Miao Village." Xiaolan didn't hide it, and nodded generously. Seeing Xiaolan admit it, Ning Yu smiled slightly. "No wonder you know our Tianluo Pavilion, so you are from Miao Village, but there is only one beautiful woman in Miao Village, and that is Miss Xiaolan, the righteous daughter of King Miao. You are Miss Xiaolan, right?" Ning Yu said this, Xiaolan's heart blossomed. Which girl doesn't like being praised by others for being beautiful? "Yes, I am Xiaolan," Xiaolan nodded. "If I'm not mistaken, then this is David." Ning Yu looked at David and said. "How do you know him?" Xiaolan was taken aback. "I am afraid that there is no one in the whole southwest who does not know him. There are very few people who dare to kill the eldest young master of Tianwu Men. Now that day, the master of Wu Men, Xia Hedun, was furious and was looking for you everywhere. Yesterday, the people of Tianyu killed him. Miao Village suffered heavy casualties. If it hadn't been for the martial arts leader to come forward, it is estimated that Miao Village would have been wiped out. Ning Yu sneered. Hearing that Miao Village was about to be destroyed, Xiaolan's heart twitched instantly. Although she had already left Miao Village and would never return to Miao Village in her life, she still felt sad when she heard the news. Ning Yu, do you know each other? Help me introduce. Seeing that Ning Yu knew Xiaolan, Ren Sikeng came over immediately and said expectantly. It seemed that he was tempted by Xiaolan. Ning Yu glanced at Ren Sikeng. If you don't want to die, it's better not to know each other. Ning Yu's words instantly cooled Ren Sikeng's enthusiasm and walked back to his mother obediently. Mom, sit down, I'll let Ning Yu treat you. Ren Sikeng squatted down and followed his mother very filially. Ren Xian listened to Ren Sikeng's words, his face suddenly embarrassed, and he looked at David. After all, he invited David to come, and now his son has invited someone again, and it was Ning Yu who invited Ren Xian. If it was an ordinary doctor, Ren Xian would have driven him away long ago, but now his wife's illness, should he let Ning Yu see or David? Ren Xian couldn't make up his mind either, which was a bit embarrassing. Sun Simiao also felt a little embarrassed. After all, he introduced David to come here, and now it has become like this, so Sun Simiao leaned over to David and said softly, Mr. Chen, Sikeng didn't know he invited you here, so don't take offense. David smiled slightly and shook his head, it's okay. Seeing that David didn't take offense, Ren Xian's hanging heart was relieved. Ning Yu, please take a look. Ren Xian made a gesture of invitation and asked Ning Yu to show his wife. After all, David didn't see anything just now, and Ren Xian didn't know anything about it. Uncle Ren, you're too polite, I'll show Auntie a look right away. After Ning Yu finished speaking, he walked up to Ren Xian's wife. Ning Yu and Ren Sikeng exchanged glances. Although the two were very careful, they were discovered by the careful David. Chapter 757. Through the eyes of the two people, David also seemed to be able to guess what, plus the house was under the formation, there must be something strange. Auntie, stretch out your hand, I'll show you first. Ning Yu put his hand on Ren Sikeng's mother's wrist lightly, and closed his eyes slightly, as if that was the case. Looking at David's appearance just now, he didn't diagnose the pulse, and he didn't look carefully. Just one glance and he knew everything. This is a bit too fake. If it wasn't for Sun Simiao's recommendation, Ren Xian wouldn't trust David so much, and if he gave him a gift, he would definitely be driven out as a liar. After a while, Ning Yu got up and Ren Sikeng hurriedly asked, Ning Yu, is my mother all right? Sikeng, there's nothing serious about my aunt. It's just that her body is invaded by yin qi, which causes migraine headaches. Just take me to force that yin qi out of my aunt's body. After Ning Yu finished speaking, he took out a talisman from nowhere, muttered something in his mouth, and then suddenly stuck it on Ren Sikeng's mother's forehead. Seeing that Ren Sikeng's mother was immobilized, she did not move, not even blinking. For a moment, a black gas began to emerge from the top of Ren Sikeng's mother's head. The black gas seemed to have life. After coming out of the body, it instantly turned into a human shape and quickly floated towards the window. Hey, I still want to run. That Ning Yu snorted coldly, took out a porcelain bottle from his pocket, threw it towards the black gas, and the black gas was instantly sucked into the porcelain bottle. After this operation, Ren Xian looked stupid. He was just an ordinary person, how could he have seen such a scene before? Even Sun Simiao was shocked. Although Sun Simiao was a martial artist himself, he had not seen much of this method of chasing ghosts and exorcising evil spirits. After the black air was sucked into the porcelain vase, the vase flew back into Ning Yu's hands instantly, and the spell on Ren Sikeng's mother's head instantly turned into a puff of white smoke. Look, have you seen it? This Ning Yu is too powerful. It's not a shame that it came from Tianluo Pavilion. Ren Xian was stunned, and his words were a little awkward. Sun Simiao nodded vigorously, also full of shock. Now Sun Simiao and Ren Xian seemed to have been convinced by Ning Yu's hand. Ren Xian, in particular, seems to have forgotten the existence of David. It is not that Ren Xian is snobbish, but that he, as an ordinary person, has never seen such a scene at all. Now he suddenly sees that he has already been completely conquered. In his eyes, Ning Yu was like a fairy. I have taken away the yin qi from my aunt's body, and there will be no more problems in the future. After putting away the porcelain bottle, Ning Yu said lightly. Ning Yu, you are so talented, thank you so much, tell me, how do you want me to repay you? Ren Sikeng said to Ning Yu happily. Sikeng, we are classmates. What do you want in return for helping your aunt see a doctor? It's very unusual. Ning Yu smiled slightly and declined. Ning Yu, although you and Sikeng are classmates, you can't let you help in vain. I also know the rules of your business. You can't go away for nothing. This will ruin your life. Tell me, what do you want? What? Ren Xian asked in a good mood. Ren Xian was happy that his wife's illness was cured. Seeing Ren Xian say this, Ning Yu said a little embarrassedly, I didn't expect Uncle Ren to know the rules of our business. Since Uncle Ren has asked this, then I have the cheek to ask Uncle Ren for something. Tell me, what do you want? As long as my family has it, I will give it to you. Ren Xian patted his chest and said. I heard that Uncle Ren has a gilt pot. I like this kind of thing. I don't know. Ning Yu said, looking at Ren Xian's face, and seeing Ren Xian's face change, Ning Yu didn't finish his words. Chapter 758. Ren Xianwei frowned in embarrassment. This gilt pot is his favorite. It is said that this gilt pot was dug out from the mausoleum of a generation of queens. It is very beautiful. But Ning Yu spoke up, people were optimistic about his wife's illness, and Ren Xian also said big things. If he didn't give it now, wouldn't it be too embarrassing? Well, since you like it, I'll give it to you. Ren Xian sighed helplessly and said. Then he winked at a servant, who hurriedly left. After a while, the servant came out with a gilded kettle. Ning Yu, this gilt pot is invaluable, you have to keep it well. Ren Xian took the gilded water bottle and sent it to Ning Yu very reluctantly. Ning Yu nodded slightly and didn't say a word, but the expression on his face had long since become excited. After taking over the gilt pot, Ning Yu directly put the ghost in the porcelain vase into the gilt pot, and then followed Ren Xian to say goodbye, thinking of leaving. However, just as Ning Yu was about to leave, David stopped him. Actually, you know how to control the soul, and it has nothing to do with me, but you use this magic to harm people, so I have to take care of it. David said lightly. When David uttered the three words spirit control, Ning Yu's originally arrogant face was obviously startled, and even the corners of Ren Sikeng's eyes twitched. What are you, dare to stop Ning Yu? Ren Sikeng stepped forward and questioned David angrily. Mr. Chen, what are you doing? Sun Simiao saw that David actually stopped Ning Yu, and opened his mouth to say something he couldn't understand, so he asked carefully. Mr. Chen, where did Ning Yu offend you? I can make amends on his behalf. What do you mean by blocking it? Ren Xian also spoke, although he still called Mr. Chen, but there was obviously some unhappiness in his tone. After all, Ning Yu just took care of his wife's illness. David stopped Ning Yu in front of him, which was too much. What do I mean? You don't understand, but he must understand. David smiled at Ning Yu, and suddenly grabbed the gilt pot in Ning Yu's hand. Ning Yu was stunned for a moment, then quickly retreated. At the same time, when Ren Sikeng saw that David actually did something to Ning Yu, his face became angry, and he punched David fiercely. Sikeng, don't do it. Seeing Ren Sikeng attacking David, Sun Simiao hurriedly shouted and stood in front of David. Palace Master Sun, did you bring this person? Do you feel like you have lost face and deliberately followed Ning Yu to find fault? Ren Xikeng withdrew his hands and questioned Sun Simiao. Sun Simiao didn't know what David meant at this time, so he could only look back at David and asked, Mr. Chen, why are you doing this? Sun Simiao felt that David was not the kind of person with a small stomach, and he would definitely not do anything to Ning Yu for this. Since you all want to know, then I will let you understand. After David finished speaking, he suddenly raised his hands and typed a magic formula at a very fast speed, only to see a flash of white light in the room, and then everyone was shocked. Ren Xikeng's mother was even more frightened and screamed, because they saw that there were countless black mists floating in the room, and the black mist was constantly changing its shape, like a ghost, showing its teeth and claws. These black mists were exactly the same as those that Ning Yu had put into the porcelain vase just now, but now there were too many, filling the entire room. Now, except for David and Ning Yu, everyone's frightened faces have changed color. Although Sun Simiao has a lot of experience and cultivation, he was also frightened by the scene in front of him, and his whole body trembled. Chapter 759. Xiaolan was also very frightened, and hid tightly behind David. Lin Tianhu and Chifeng had followed David and had seen these things, but when so many appeared all at once, their faces became pale. Just when a few people were frightened, they saw David's hand gently waved, the black mist disappeared, and the room returned to its original state again. Chen, Mr. Chen, what is this? Is it a ghost? Sun Simiao took a long breath and asked David. At this time, Ren Xian was so frightened that he curled up on the sofa, trembling constantly, very gaff. That Ren Xikeng's face changed, and he approached Ning Yu unconsciously. What you see is just one soul in people's 3 souls and 7 souls. After a person dies, the 3 souls and 7 souls are separated from the body, and the 7 souls dissipate. After that, the heavenly soul ascends to the sky, the earth soul enters the earth, and the life soul enters the reincarnation. Now, these black mists are the souls of the earth, also known as ghosts, which are commonly known as ghosts. David followed Sun Simiao to explain. Although Sun Simiao was confused, he seemed to understand a little bit, so he continued to ask, can the soul controlling technique just mentioned by Mr. Chen be able to control these ghosts? Not bad. David nodded slightly. These ghosts are just some energy bodies. Originally, they are extremely weak, and it is even more impossible to hurt people, but if someone deliberately controls these ghosts and absorbs yin, then these weak ghosts will become a monster. After listening to David's introduction, Sun Simiao immediately reacted. He also understood why David had shot at Ning Yu just now. It should be that Ning Yu used this soul-controlling technique to harm the Ren Xian family. But it was clear that Ning Yu was here to treat Ren Xikeng's mother, and they saw with their own eyes a black fog came out of Ren Xikeng's mother's body. Now Sun Simiao is getting more and more confused, and he doesn't know what is going on. After all, he doesn't know anything about Taoism. How can you say that you are also a member of the Ren family, but you harm your family so much? Do you know that there is divine condemnation in the dark? David looked at Ren Xikeng and said. What nonsense are you talking about? I don't understand at all. Ren Xikeng's complexion changed greatly, and he shouted at David. Mr. Chen, what's going on here? Ren Xian had recovered from his shock and walked to David to ask. He himself was confused. David looked at Ren Xian, smiled slightly and said, your house has been put into formation, and there are ghosts in this house, your family is afraid that it will die soon. Hearing what David said, Ren Xian's face instantly became extremely ugly. Mr. Chen, please be more detailed, this. What's going on here? Ren Xian didn't understand, who would harm his family? Patriarch Ren, you said that Ning Yu chose the place where you are building your house now. David asked. Yes, the entire land, including the building layout, was chosen by Ning Yu painstakingly. Ren Xian nodded. The place you choose to live in now is the land of 7 evil spirits, and it's still a yin place with extremely heavy yin, which is just right for raising the soul. Your house is also a white tiger raising its head. Look up, the white tiger will hurt people. I said this, I believe that the owner of the family should know what happened, right? David said to Ren Xian. As soon as he entered the yard, David felt that something was wrong. After entering the villa, he knew that the house had been cast a spell, but when he saw that Ning Yu used the soul-controlling technique to attract a lot of ghosts, David realized that the original this is still a land of 7 evil spirits. Ren Xian is stupid, he can also hear that this place was chosen by Ning Yu, this house was designed and built by Ning Yu, and Ning Yu can also control the soul. There are so many ghosts in his house, the most important point is that this Ning Yu is his son's classmate. Ren Xian immediately understood what David had just said. Chapter 760. Ren Xian stared at his son Ren Sikeng, his eyes full of doubts and questions. Sikeng, what the H3LL is going on? Ren Xian asked with a cold face. Dad, don't listen to the nonsense of this guy named David. You don't think I want to hurt you, do you? How can I? Ning Yu won't, he's my best friend. Although Ren Sikeng seemed a little flustered, he was still trying to deny it. Ren Xian is also undecided now. After all, Ren Sikeng's son is his own son. How could he harm his relatives? What good would it do to him? Ning Yu, is what Mr. Chen said true? Did you deliberately choose a fierce place and set up a formation? Ren Xian looked at Ning Yu and asked. Since his son doesn't know anything, it is possible that Ning Yu lied to his son and arranged it secretly. However, Ning Yu ignored Ren Xian's question, but looked at David, his pupils shrank slightly and said, I didn't expect that you can kill Xia Chao because of the Taoism you know. Knowing Taoism, at your age, you are considered a genius. You are a genius, and you can learn such a method at a young age. It's a pity that you took the wrong path. David smiled coldly. Ha ha ha, went the wrong way. Ning Yu laughed, his face full of disdain. The way I go, there is no right or wrong, and no one is qualified to comment on me. I studied with my master for 4 years, and God, I have inherited most of the master's inheritance, and even my brother who has been studying for decades is not as good as me. I am the real genius. In the future, I will be the master of Tianluo Pavilion. Although you are very strong, you can be considered a genius. But what does it count in my eyes? Ning Yu's tone was arrogant, completely different from the humble look just now. Since you consider yourself a genius, do you dare to admit what I said just now? David looked at the arrogant Ning Yu and asked calmly. Yes, why not? I just chose the land of the 7 evil spirits, I set up the formation, and attracted the ghosts. Within a month, everyone in the Ren family will die violently. These are all done by me. Ning Yu admitted without hesitation. After Ren Xian listened, his whole body trembled, his eyes were wide open, and he wanted to eat Ning Yu's heart. Ning Yu, what nonsense are you talking about? Ren Sikeng was so frightened that he hurriedly reprimanded Ning Yu, then looked at Ren Xian and said, Dad, Ning Yu is talking nonsense, how could he do this, it's not good for him either? Ren Sikeng tried his best to explain, but was interrupted by Ning Yu. Sikeng, it's all here now, you don't have to pretend or be afraid of them, so what if they know? Ren Sikeng looked at Ning Yu and began to be silent, and he could be regarded as acquiescing to Ning Yu's words. Seeing this, Ren Xian trembled with anger, waiting for Ren Sikeng with anger on his face. Beast, beast, I want to kill you, you beast, why do you do this? From now on, you are no longer me. Ren Xian's son. Ren Xian shivered and stepped forward to slap Ren Sikeng, but was pushed away by Ren Sikeng. Ren Xian was stunned, because since childhood, Ren Sikeng had never dared to do this with him. Enough, I'm not your son, nor the flesh and blood of the Ren family, you don't need to kick me out of the Ren family. Ren Sikeng growled vigorously. You! What did you say? You dare to say it again. Ren Xian did not expect that Ren Sikeng would dare to say outrageous words. I tell you, I'm not your son at all. From childhood to adulthood, you have always been partial to the elder brother, and you have always wanted to give the elder brother the position of the head of the house. I thought you didn't like me, so you gave the position of the head of the house to the elder brother. Later, after reading my mother's diary, I realized that I am not the flesh and blood of the Ren family at all. No wonder you are partial to the big brother. I hate you, so I will kill you all. By then, the property of the Ren family will be mine. Ren Sikeng's face became hideous, like a mad tiger, roaring continuously.